There we go. Awesome. All right. So hello, everyone. On behalf of Library Makers, I would like to welcome you to Tool Talk, the Night of the Haunted Vector Program. My name is Maya Berry, and I am the digital librarian at Northwest Mississippi Community College. Library Makers is a community that connects and supports library staff from all over the country and libraries big and small who are all at different points in their maker journey. Whether you are just getting started or you have been making for many years, we invite you to ask questions and to share your experiences on our librarymakers.org platform. This site has its own social platform where you can connect and get to know and share maker questions, ideas, and resources, a blog, a video library of past events, and a membership that actively engages in discussions about making in libraries. I would like to introduce Cela, Janiec, Studio Specialist from Anythink Libraries, and Kelsey, Thompson, Teen Services Librarian from Lafayette Public Library. And as we said earlier, they are both from Colorado. So I'm going to stop my screen sharing and let Cela and Kelsey get set up here.
Cela, I had kind of organized mine with the expectation that you would go first, but I didn't actually confirm that with you. So perfect.
That was my expectation as well.
Yes, good. We worked together for 4 years, so we're still on the same page.
Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen I'm going to start with Illustrator. And then for about 20 minutes or so, and then Kelsey will hop over and do her side of things using Inkscape. The difference between Illustrator and Inkscape, if no one knows, is that Illustrator is a software that is created by Adobe, which means that you do have to purchase a subscription fee in order to use it. Inkscape, however, is a free software that I know a lot of libraries and a lot of customers download and use for free. And they're both vector-based programs. They both have very similar capabilities, but also have some pretty big differences as well. And we'll go over some of those things. So some of the tools that I'll be going over are the ones that are most popular when working with patrons. These are going to be the shape tool, shape builder, pen tool, especially. It can be a very intimidating little tool. But once you get to know it, it can play nice, I promise. So we are going to create this little jack-o'-lantern and kind of introduce you to Illustrator's medley of canvas tools. Most of them you don't really need to know. You can definitely explore them, but when it comes to working with patrons, I have found that these are the ones that you're going to be working with the most. So they're the ones that you'll probably want to get the most familiar with in a quicker way. So can everyone see the canvas that I'm on? I just want to double check and make sure. Alrighty, coolness. So to start with this little jack-o'-lantern, I'm going to go onto our shape tool right here. If you right click on it and you're on a Windows, you'll be able to see these medley of tools that you can use. For this jack-o'-lantern, we're just going to stick with ellipses. And what I always encourage people to do is just throw things down and edit later. So like we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different ovals here. They don't look like a jack-o'-lantern yet, but in time they will. So once we've got our ovals here, that's where we can start changing our color. Most vector programs are going to have this kind of fill and stroke tool, if you will, in somewhere around there. And that's the fill is going to be your main color that you're using, whereas a stroke is going to be an outline. So for example, if I made our stroke orange and made it large, you can see how our center oval here gets that outline. For my purposes, we're not going to use a stroke, but what we are going to do is use our colors here to create our jack-o'-lantern. And when we are working with something that has a kind of rounded three-dimensional illusion on a 2D surface, that's where you can use color to your advantage. Where we have the brightest, lightest color in the front and the darker colors in the back will help push that face forward. So when we select multiple ovals here, we can see that on the one over here, we're going from lighter to darker. And you'll also see that the ovals are on separate layers of each other. Like our black ones are now on the front. That's because those are the ones that I made last. To send them back would mean pushing them behind these other ovals and allowing them to move back in space. So now we can grab our other color, and ta-da, we have kind of a pumpkin. This is where our editing can come into play. When you click on your oval, you're going to have a bunch of these little dots. A lot of vector programs are going to have it. Glowforge and Cricut also are machines and softwares that have this capability as well, where when you select an object, you can move it and stretch it and rotate it a certain way so that you can get the illusion that you're going for. We've created a pumpkin, minus the stem. Any questions on the shape tool? It's very quick, but it's also a very simple tool that kind of, once you get the hang of how to use it, as well as a little bit of color theory, you can create very effective graphics in a very short amount of time. From here, we're going to use our shape builder tool, because when we're transferring to other machines like Glowforge or Cricut, if I select all of my ovals here, you'll see where all of these ovals intersect. That can be a problem, especially for Glowforge, because it sees these lines, even though when we're unselected, we don't. We just see essentially crescents, but what Glowforge is seeing, ovals, intersecting ones that will cause your line work to fail whenever you're doing any kind of laser engraving. So to use the shape builder on Illustrator, it's this little guy right over here. I don't know how well y'all can see it, but Adobe has a very bad habit of making their user interface very small and inaccessible. So it's this little tiny guy right there. And what that does is when I hover, you can see how all these intersecting shapes get a checkerboard type texture to them. And when I click and hold, I can combine all those yellow ones, and it will create a single solid oval for me. Now, when I select all of them, you can see that that single center oval is no longer intersected with those other ones. That makes it so that your Glowforge, your laser engraver, whatever kind of machine you're using for the end product, is going to see what you're seeing when we don't have it selected. So we're just going to go ahead and clean up the rest of these. That's been some of
Cela,
my
I
biggest
just want to point
Yes.
out, for folks who aren't as familiar with design software, when she's choosing the colors, she's using the
Yes.
eyedropper tool. I just
am.
want to, yes, just in case you
This-
haven't seen.
Yes. I'm a shortcuts person on my keyboard. I'm using the eyedropper, which is this little one right here. And what that is allowing me to do is to very rapidly, if you look back over on my fill here, to switch between colors. And that is something that people who are more familiar with these softwares can very easily take advantage of and forget that everyone needs to be taught at different methods. So we're going to go ahead and combine our lighter orange ones together. So now, if I were to move these away from each other, they're crescents instead of ovals now. And that will allow our Cricut or our laser Glowforge or any other machine that we're working with to see things the proper way. Any questions about that?
Yeah, you used a combine tool in properties?
It's called the shape builder. It's right here. This one right here. And it is unique to Illustrator. And it is one of the biggest boons to Illustrator. It's one of those tools that it's actually fairly new. They updated it a couple years ago. before it didn't exist and people had to work around it to create a combination effect like this using different methods, primarily the Pathfinder tool.
You will see how jealous I am of the shape builder tool when we get into the Inkscape portion.
Yes, when Kelsey goes over the Inkscape, she will show you the ways that she managed this without the shape builder tool. So from here, we're going to go to our pen tool. And that is what we'll do for our eyes and mouth. The pen tool is pretty basic for a lot of vector programs. It's also one of the ones that can be very intimidating for people because it looks like it can be a bit complicated sometimes. And I'm actually going to change my color out to a nice purple. So the pen tool allows you to create anchor points to create a shape. Because if we go back to our shape tool, there's no triangle option here. I could technically cut a square in half to create a triangle, but it's faster to go through the pen tool and just create a quick triangle like that. It's not going to be a perfect triangle. It can be if I type in my XY axis points, but I'm not terribly worried about that because we're creating eye slots for a jack-o'-lantern. And similar with the shape tool is we can manipulate it in certain ways and get it to the point that we want it to work with. And this is why I always tell people to just lay down the groundwork, because you see how I'm doing this right here? It looks like a mess, right? Currently our mouthpiece, but we're not done yet. And a lot of people, whenever I'm working with patrons, they have a fear of committing. But with the pen tool and with the digital media, every point you use, every point you put down, you can very easily change, delete, or add to. So as soon as we start going down and creating more of our shape, that's going to allow us to then go in and edit it. So I can edit it by going over to our direct selection tool. And what that's going to allow me to do, let me go ahead and zoom in so you can see there's these tiny, tiny, tiny little blue dots called anchor points, which for this particular shape is where our corners are, where they intersect. And what that allows me to do, once I click on it, is I can move it around and better change what the mouthpiece looks like. And what a lot of people, in my experience, will do instead, they will want to make it completely perfect before they put down their points. So they'll be placing things down and then they're like, oh, I don't like that. And they'll undo it and they'll go back and don't like that one either. So they just end up not quite completing their project because they have that fear of commitment. But with the pen tool especially, I always recommend go ahead, put down those anchor points because you can always change them with just a simple click and drag. Let's make them a little happier. There we go. That's a happier pumpkin. That is the basics of the pen tool. I haven't gone into any curvature options with it. They're called Boolean curves or Boolean tools, very similar to what you can use in AutoCAD and, as Kelsey will go over, Inkscape and other vector programs. Oh, let's do it the other way. What's everyone think about our jack-o'-lantern? Shall we name him? He looks like a Steve to me.
Yeah, I think Steve would be a good name.
It's an excellent pumpkin name.
Yeah.
Boris.
That can be
yeah.
a middle name.
We'll do this one. This one's Boris and this one's Steve.
Perfect.
So from here, we're going to go into our Pathfinder tool. And the way that I can show y'all is when we go in to make some shadows. You can see here, I've got some shadows right in there. And the way that I do that is, again, with the pen tool. And we're going to actually start adding a curve to it. So when you click and hold, that's what's going to allow you to create these curved lines. And since pumpkins are roundish kind of shapes, we're going to give that illusion of a three-dimensional object. I know it looks like a mess right now. We can add a curve to it and watch the magic happen, because as I click away, it creates that shape down below. Now, let's go ahead and change it to a better color for a shadow. Do something like that. And a lot of vector programs will also have this opacity tool down here that will change how transparent or opaque your color is. So now we can make it a proper shadow. But as you can see, it's all over the place. It's not connected to the pumpkin, and we can see that it's more of like a cowl instead of a shadow. So the way to ensure that it doesn't look like that anymore, you can use Pathfinder or you can use Shape Builder. Both are good options. And Pathfinder is this tool down here. It automatically populates in Illustrator whenever you have a shape selected. And when we hover over it, we can see that there's this main one right here that's combine, and this one is subtract, intersect, and I forget the name of the other one. But ultimately, I really only ever use these first two ones. And even then, the Pathfinder or the Shape Builder tool is a very good mirror to this Pathfinder tool. So when we click on that first one, it combines all shapes. So if we had something that was several shapes and we just wanted to smush them all together, make them all one thing, that's the one we're looking for. If we do the other one, what it does is it can kind of get a little, the program is only as smart as the engineers who designed it, and unfortunately they were not artists. So they can get a little confused because at the moment we only have a little tiny bit of our squash. We've completely lost all of it. And that can definitely happen sometimes, especially when you're working with multiple shapes. And that's okay. Whenever you want to undo something, Control Z is going to be your friend, Command Z on the Mac. That is just the undo tool. You can also go up to edit, and undo will be right up there. So let's go ahead and just click that away. Ta-da! That was with the Shape Builder tool. When we're working with, let me go ahead and drag our jack-o'-lantern out here because, oh, I suppose we don't have to. I have a habit of working off of the canvas, the white space, because often I'm working with white color. But I can give a quick example of what the Pathfinder tool does. So when I have both of those shapes selected and clicked on our little, what did I call it earlier? Subtraction tool for the Pathfinder, it removes the eye shape from our oval shape. This would be great if you wanted to add like a flame behind it, or like a moving GIF of fire could be really cool. This is great for adding multiple layers to your object by creating transparency or cutouts. For our purposes, we're going to leave it solid. And then what's next? Image trace. So image trace is one of the things that most customers are going to use very, very often. What image tracing is doing is grabbing we're going to go ahead and just import an image. We're going to grab a little hat. We're going to zoom out because it's ported in very large. So I want everyone, 1, 2, or 3, the top hats. Which hat do we want to do?
I
3.
like the first one.
Christina said in chat 3.
Oh, okay. We have 2 votes for 3, so we're going to do number 3. So if you look over here right now, this is a JPEG, an image file that we've just ported in. If we click on it and look over here, it says image trace. We're going to hop over and do crop image first, because if we try to image trace something that we ultimately don't need, it can just it'll use up a lot of memory usage of your computer. So shrinking it down first and then image tracing it is the way to go. Image tracing is essentially going to port the image that you're using and make it into shapes, the same way that we have our jack-o'-lantern that is multiple shapes. Because right now, this is a rasterized image. What that means is that it is made up of pixels. With a vector program, we want to vectorize it and make it into these shapes that are then editable, where we can change the color of the buckle if we wanted to. So once we click image trace, it'll give us a little menu of options. For this particular one, we're going to do the 6 colors. What that means is that the software is just going to try to recognize a maximum of 6 colors to use to recreate the image. So right now, the image is vectorized. We can't really tell because it's still sandwiched in the way that the JPEG is. Once we hit expand in our quick actions, you can immediately see how the program vectorized the shadows and colors into different shapes via these blue lines here. And when we ungroup it, we can take away our white background and you can see how the white is also now a shape too. We don't need it, we're going to delete it, but that kind of will help you better understand and better see what we're looking at. So now that we have a vectorized shape, we can squish it, we can stretch it, we can rotate it, we can do all kinds of things to it. We can even change its color. Let's go ahead and do a jaunty little hat. And what also this allows us to do, so you see how this hat has that shadow underneath it? That is what's giving it the illusion of depth. Because we vectorized it, we can remove this shadow and we can actually move it so that it is behind the pumpkin, but still leaves the rest of those shapes above the pumpkin, creating that illusion that the hat is actually on top of the jack-o'-lantern. And that is image trace. That is by far one of the most popular things that we do in our space is the image tracing in order to port that into Glowforge or Cricut. And ta-da, we've got 2 jack-o'-lanterns. We've got Steve and Dolores. Any questions from there? It can be a lot. I do highly recommend going through the recording in the future as well. And there are also plenty of tutorials out there that can walk you through all of these individual tools that we've seen as well. We'll go ahead and
Excuse
stop
me, yeah.
sharing.
I've done some image trace on some text and occasionally end up with the inner, like on an R, the inner circle not being selected.
Oh, for sure. That is actually a huge problem. And image tracing text is in my personal opinion, one of the hardest things to do because it is never a guarantee of how well it'll come out. This is influenced by the size of the image, is influenced by the, not just like the physical size of the image, but also how much data it's using. So like, for example, if we wanted to trace this witch hat collection up here, we'll go ahead and crop down to there. We can already see that it's going to be, there are a lot of details to it. We're going to do an image trace and we're going to do, let's do a black and white logo and see what it looks like. This one's not too bad because let me look at the image size, the gigabytes of how big this image is. It's 253 kilobytes. That's a decent memory for an image file. And that allows it to be image traced more accurately. When you are image tracing something like a PDF file, a Word document, something that has a lot of small text, that's where you can start seeing some occlusion, where you're losing the inside of your O's, you're losing the insides of your R's. The best way to fix that is if we go into where it says image trace right here, and that's where we change what method we use. In Illustrator, there's this little box right there, and that will open up a little menu that you can change elements to. And I always recommend just playing around with it. So if we increase our threshold, we can see that we're losing a lot of details. We're losing some of those drips. We're losing the inside of the A. So we're actually going to bring our threshold down. Once we click on advanced, these other options here will help you to better make your image work. There's no right or wrong answer when it comes to these settings. What I always recommend is just play around with them, see which ones work best. So let's look at the word hat specifically. If we have high paths, we have a lot of detail. If we have low paths, we're removing a lot of detail. So this is becoming more of like a frozen wasteland font versus a spooky, drippy font. And that's just changing the paths. Each option will change little bits of how your font is looking. If you're working with a very small font, a very small image size, like how much memory it's using, I would recommend just typing it out manually. Because when it comes to image tracing, very small amounts of data, it will just artifact it more and more and cause a lot of issues that will take longer to fix as opposed to just typing it out.
When you say typing it out, say in Glowforge or something, use their native font or something to add a font there?
So you can't add fonts to Glowforge, but you can port fonts. You can't port fonts from Illustrator, but what you can do. So let's say that we wanted to port this particular font to Glowforge. The main issue is that when you try to move a font to Glowforge that is in text mode, as in you can click on it and edit it and change it, what that is doing is confusing the system. In Illustrator, in order to get this particular font to Glowforge in an image kind of way, but not a text kind of way, if you scroll down while the text is selected and hit create outlines, what that does is it makes it no longer editable from a text point of view, as in I cannot change what it says anymore, not without manually typing in and moving something in. But what it can do is that these are now seen as shapes as opposed to text. So I can go in and they give you a lot of anchor points here, but we can go in and manually change how the font looks if we wanted to try something out like that. And when you can port this into Glowforge now, it no longer reads as an editable text, and you can port it in as an image type file or an SVG, a scalable vector graphic, and that will port into Glowforge just fine. If you want to ever add any more text, you would have to go back into Illustrator, type out your new text in your font, create it into it outlines again, save it as your file, and then move it back into Glowforge. It can be a very tedious process, but when you have a very particular font you're working with, it can be worth it because then you'll be able to get the font you want.
Yeah, I think text is always one of the struggles with any kind of design software, especially when it comes to finding like compatibility. I don't know if you've ever have tried like taking an image that like from Illustrator where you typed something in and tried to port it into Glowforge. You'll get a message saying like could not import parts of the file because the text was not recognized, etc. And that's what Cela's trying to resolve. But the other thing is like any kind of image, if you try to do an image trace that is really, really low, like your original image is really low resolution, which means like when you're looking at it, it looks grainy or pixelated. Your initial text, it's just not gonna be able to do the image trace very well. And I think that's what you tend to run into a lot with text because it's usually a small part of an image.
We're not yet at the age where it's like on CSI or any other crime drama where you can say enhance and it'll be all of a sudden super clear. The image trace will only work so well as what your image allows. And if it's a very low resolution image, there's only so much you can get out of it.
I've used Photoshop using color select
Mhm.
to trace an image. What do you think about that, using it that way? And then bringing it into Illustrator or somewhere else, or
So to color selecting in Photoshop is a good way of I use it very often to remove a background, especially if you don't want to vectorize the image. To select using it in order to grab font, if it's a very clear, like black and white, like it's a PDF or something that was digitally created, that can work. If it is a photo, that's going to have some issues to it, because what you see as black font on a white page, the program is seeing as black, gray, dark gray, slightly lighter gray, white. And that can cause issues in the sense that you're porting what you see as a W or the word was, but the program is seeing as pixels. So each square of color is an individual pixel, and it can only select the colors that you're telling it to select. You're clicking on the black, it's only going to grab the black. It's not going to grab those other shades of gray. It can be helpful for certain projects, not for others. Ultimately, when working with these type of programs, it's learning the tools enough to figure out what would be the best method to help the patron.
I
I'm gonna
had
go ahead.
text.
Oh, go ahead.
I had text in a Word in Microsoft Word, and to get that into the Glowforge, I had to go through a lot of manipulations, exporting PDF and,
Oh yeah.
and then into another program and back and forth. I ended up, it was easier just in the native program like Glowforge, or we have Xtool. Just generating the font there, and finding as close a
Mhm.
font as I could get to the original.
For sure. I often will try to persuade customers to work with fonts that are generated by Glowforge or Cricut or Xtool, because the process to get a very particular font can be time consuming and not something that the customer is ready to learn yet, or doesn't have enough time to go through. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so that Kelsey can get going.
Hello. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So we are going to start. Can I just share the whole thing? I don't want to select a window. I want to select the whole thing. Sorry, this is the first time I've shared a screen. Now we know. Okay, so I'll go ahead and.
You should be able to click on screen.
Yeah, oh, here we go. Yeah, thank you, Cela. That was truly, wow. Okay, so I'm gonna put this down. This is I bought this computer because I thought I knew that it would be a good one, and I was wrong. As somebody who builds computers, you'd like to think that you know what you're doing, but sometimes you just don't. But so this is Inkscape. Inkscape is a free vector design software. It's an open source software. And as you can see immediately off the bat, it's not as pretty as Illustrator. But it is, I personally, especially for folks that don't have a background in design, or computer assisted design, I think that Inkscape is actually a little bit easier to use. One of the other benefits of Inkscape, besides the fact that it's free, is that Illustrator and a lot of the Adobe software requires a pretty good, like a decent computer to be able to utilize it fully. Whereas Inkscape, you don't need to have a really high-powered computer to use it. There are certain operations. I've definitely crashed Inkscape plenty of times on PCs because I've tried to do some operation that is a little bit too much data crunching for that computer, but that doesn't mean that it's not, it doesn't mean that it can't function in some way. I just realized that for that computer, I needed to scale it back just a little bit. So we are going to talk about shapes. I designed this one. It's not as pretty as Cela's. But the intention for this design was to create something that would work and play nicely, specifically with the Glowforge for a relatively like quick or any kind of vector-based design software. You'll see I put the outline here in red, and that's because certain laser cutters require a certain color for your actual cut lines versus your engraved lines. As well as a certain size of your path, external path. So like Cela mentioned, most pictures the way I like to describe it to patrons is most pictures when you find them online are going to either be in like a JPEG, a JPG, or a PNG or something like that format. And those are all what we call raster-based images, which means that they're composed of pixels, tiny dots. So at some point when you expand it, you're going to be able to start seeing those individual dots and it starts to look pixelated, whereas a vector line is composed of essentially vectors. If anybody here has taken physics, my background's actually in biochemistry, so I did, it's an interesting going into this. But each vector point is essentially a point that has direction, and so it's basically, I like to think of it as like cairns as you're going to, or like as you're going down a path. It'll be like you'll get to this one point, and it'll point the program to the next point, then it'll point the program to the next point, to the next point. And that's what those like nodes are, or as Illustrator calls them, anchor points, and Inkscape, they call them nodes. So I'm going to be covering basically the same stuff that Cela was covering, but you'll see that it is, as we get into kind of the shape manipulation, it is not as easy as Illustrator is, because that Pathfinder tool is truly a gem. So we're going to start essentially the same way by taking several shapes and using that to create our pumpkin general shape. In this instance, one thing that Inkscape does that Illustrator does not is it remembers what your last selection was for a shape, and then continues to use that for your next ones, which can be great, but also can be extremely annoying. Here on the side, one thing I do really like about Inkscape as well is that it will keep operations that I've used recently in this kind of side window. But if I can close them as well, and then as soon as I open it again, from somewhere up here, then I will be able to, then it will automatically bring it back. And so you'll see we have, it's set up slightly differently. But in this instance, I use this oval, create circle, ellipses, and arcs tool to create this initial ellipse. And first of all, I know that in this instance, I want to create basically line art. So I'm going to go to my object and I'm going to go to fill and stroke. So that is exactly the same as Illustrator. As soon as I do that, it pulls up this tab for me, this fill and stroke tab that I can then navigate to. I don't want to have a fill with this shape. And if I do that, you'll notice that the shape disappears, because right now I'm basically telling it like I don't want to see it. The computer will still see this shape though, if I don't have a fill or a stroke. That path is still there, because essentially, like I said, the outer bounds of a shape is defined essentially by math. So at the end of the day, all of the lines that we're creating don't actually have dimension. And that can be really confusing when folks are using Inkscape and Illustrator as well, when they're creating their shapes and they're exporting something to something like Glowforge, and they make their stroke really thick, and so you can see it really clearly. And then as soon as you export it to Glowforge or any other kind of software that views the SVG file, it sees it as just a really thin line. And we'll look at that here in a minute. But in this instance, I do want to have a stroke color. And so I'm going to tell it I want to have it be this black. At the bottom too, one thing I really like about Inkscape, I don't know, can you see at the bottom of the screen when I highlight over black, very bottom, it'll say color, black, click to set fill, shift click to set stroke. So I'm going to shift click on that. I still don't know why it's not giving me a stroke. That's another beautiful thing about Inkscape. Oh, that's because I have my width of my stroke as 0 millimeters. So I'm going to go ahead and increase that. So now we see it. So this is how all these options were there in Illustrator as well. It's just navigating to them is a little bit different. So if I made this really, really thick, and then I exported it to something like the Glowforge, it would still only see it as one thin line. Control Z, just like with most software, is going to remove or be your undo. And then for this one, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to make another oval and another oval. And I'm going to just kind of, you'll notice that now when I try to like move the oval, I just keep getting ovals. So I'll have to go, there's 2 ways to select objects, just like in Illustrator in Inkscape. So there's, instead they call it the select and transform objects tool. If you hover over it, it'll tell you what the shortcut is to get there, which is S. So I'm going to say S. And then if I click on this once, I start to get options for manipulating this shape. If I click on it twice, quickly, it will take me back to the oval tool. If I click on this again, not as quickly, it will give me tool options for other types of manipulation. One really cool thing with Inkscape as well is if I click on it and I have these tools here, you'll see how I have these 2 nodes, just like what we had with Illustrator that allowed me to manipulate the shape, width, and height. This tool, select. This tool, oh my gosh, goodness gracious, let me get there. Allows you to create like different types of that shape just from within here. If my mouse is on the inside as I'm moving it around, it will create this kind of flat line so I can make a flat circle. Or if it's outside, then I will create Pac-Man, nom nom. But I don't actually want to do that. Those are just kind of some little cool things that I like about Illustrator or Inkscape. Gosh, I keep doing that. And then in this instance, I'm going to take these. I'm going to kind of line them up like that. I'm going to change how they're lined later, but essentially I am going to now take these 2 shapes and I select them. One other thing about Inkscape that can drive some people nuts, and I understand why, is that if I click and drag to create a square or a rectangle, it doesn't select the object. It's not like most other design software. If I click and drag over kind of part of an object, it will select all of them. In this instance, I need to be including the entire shape within that click and drag. Sorry, my dog is upset with me because I haven't walked her as much as I should have today, because it's cold. So you might hear her yelling in the background. But that's one big difference with Inkscape over Illustrator as well. So in this instance, I'm going to click on this shape, and then I'm going to go ahead and hold Shift and click on the second shape to select both objects. And I'm going to copy those shapes, and then I'm going to paste them. Up here, it gives me the options to flip. It also tells me again what those shortcuts are. So if you're a shortcut fan, like I know Cela and I both are, I like to use those. Sometimes I'll be randomly hitting the keyboard for stuff and accidentally do a shortcut, and that's not as fun. But again, Control Z is your friend. And I'll go ahead and mirror that so that I can have it match on each side. Now I'm going to go ahead and move these down here, but I want them to be even. And there's a reason for this that we'll get to in a minute. But in this instance, another one of the tools that I like to use is going to be this object, align and distribute. And now I have the align and distribute here on this side. And in this instance, I'm just going to align them horizontally. And then another thing I like is I'm going to distribute horizontally with even spacing between the centers. And that just makes it look even. I know pumpkins aren't even, but in this instance, I'm going to do that because I don't know, I want to. It's my pumpkin. I can do what I want.
The
I'm gonna-
distribution tool is also something it's Illustrator cannot do that. So that's something that's unique to Inkscape.
Yeah. So there are certain things that are great about Inkscape. There are certain things that are great about Illustrator, for sure. But that distribution tool is really nice for me. One thing about Inkscape that is a little frustrating is that a lot of what we're going to be doing next, which is combining shapes. So this is where the shape builder tool today, as I was going back over how I was doing this, I was cursing the lack of the shape builder tool, but it's okay because you can still do it and it's actually not that complicated. It just means that you kind of need to move things around. And this is where I really like to have my layers showing. And this instance, I think I accidentally just put these all on my hat copy layer. So, and that's fine. I'm going to go ahead and make a new layer and I'm going to call it actual pumpkin class. I don't know, doesn't matter. I'm going to move this all the way up. I can click and drag. This text guy I can delete because I didn't actually do anything there. And then for these guys, I am going to go ahead and lock all of these. And you see as I hover over them, it gives me this locking tool. Even with it locked, I can decide whether or not I want to see it. Under this hat copy, I am going to go ahead and take these shapes, cut them, which is Control X, go to my actual pumpkin class and paste them. And now when I go here, that didn't work. I love you, Illustrator. You're the best. Or Inkscape, you're the best. Why is this not working? This was me all day today.
This can be kind of like the difference that you see fairly often because Adobe is an industry standard and it is an industry standard for a reason.
Yes.
But Inkscape being free is often a more attractive option, even though it is open source and not an industry standard.
Yes. Yeah. So it is one of those things where I'm just going to copy this to this other layer. Copy it. Lock it. Oh, it's because I put it on lock before I did that. Okay. That would make sense. So now hopefully, why are you like this? Why are you the way that you are? Whatever. It doesn't matter. It's fine. I'm actually going to go ahead and put this into a new document because at this point, that's something that happens a lot with Inkscape for me is if it's really messing something up, just start over and it's helpful. The other thing I don't understand right now is why I can't see there. Would have made this so much easier. Okay, now we can go back to the other one. I will be the first person to tell you that I am not I don't have the same background that Cela does when it comes to this kind of design. And so it makes it a little difficult sometimes, but now I can see each of these paths have a name. And I can click on them individually. And you'll see why this is relevant because right now, this center path is at the bottom in terms of the layers of how the software is seeing the paths. And where it is location-wise makes a big difference in when I start to remove objects from other objects, it knows which object it's supposed to remove based on which object I either select first and then second. Tinkercad is like that as well sometimes, and or which object which object I selected or which object is on top. So in this instance, I'm going to move this object up and I'm going to go ahead and create, oh no, now we don't have the face. I'm going to go ahead and create this crescent here. So essentially what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create both the outline of this shape to turn into my cut line, and then I'm also trying to create bounding lines so that it will engrave the details in the pumpkin, but it won't engrave all of those outlines because that's just kind of like a waste of time for the machine. So first I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this layer. And so I have all these ellipses. And first I'm going to go ahead and select all of these objects. And this is where it's kind of the similarity to the shape builder tool and also the Pathfinder tool. It's basically Pathfinder. It refers to these as Boolean operations. And that's another like physics thing, because at the end of the day, what we're doing right now is math. And in this instance, first I want to create a union. And now I have my external pumpkin shape without any of the detail. Now I'm going to go to this copy. I'm not going to go to this copy. That's what I wanted to do initially. There we go. Sorry, again, I gotta love Inkscape. It's great. It truly is. I actually do truly love Inkscape. I just, every time I do this. Now I'm going to go ahead and do this union. That did not work. Why did that? I promise this is usually easier. Cela, feel free to interject here if you have any input. Just gonna copy and paste it. That's fine. I think essentially what it is that it's seeing the duplicate of the layer as ellipses. This is what you get when you use open source software. Here we go. All right. Outline. I'm going to leave it at that and be happy with it. Now for these ones, I have this path on top and this path below it. So I actually want to kind of, because it's doing it in the order that I made them, I want to make sure that the paths that I'm creating are, the combination that I'm creating is in the correct order. I can't actually really rename these, which is unfortunate because it would make things a lot easier if I could. In terms of like, so that I know what's what. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll go ahead and change the color of certain things, certain lines or stroke lines so that I know what's what. And I'm going to go ahead and select both of these. I'm going to go to path. And in this instance, I'm going to go to, I never remember which one it is, intersection. Nope. Sorry, ignore my dog. Path, difference. And now I have this crescent shape. So I can just go ahead and again, copy and paste my crescent and mirror it. And now I can move that to be my lines. I made that look a lot harder than it usually is. Part of it is that I'm at a point with this computer where since I have all of my original pumpkin, as well as my, as well as this layer, it's starting to use a lot more information than the software is as good at doing. So this is very annoying when you have something right next to each other and you don't want to grab anything up here, but you do want to select this object. In this instance, you can actually go over here and select it all to move it. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So now I have my outline, my new path, and my new path. I'm going to go ahead and move this outline up. And you'll see, I don't know if you can quite see it, there's these little tiny green like bars that kind of tell you where you're putting it. Now I'm going to rename this layer crescent outline. So I'm going to create a new layer, outline, add, and put that onto that and close it. So for the similarity when it comes to the pen tool, and I need to kind of hurry up, I know we're running out of time, and part of that was because my software was being kind of a pain, and also I wasn't quite doing it correctly. So there's up here, you're going to have the different modes for your pen tool. Again, it's going to be the same thing as a pen tool, but it's basically, they say it like it is, and it says draw Bezier curves and straight lines, which is great. But that can be a little confusing for folks that aren't as familiar. So in this instance, I have this selected as this a sequence of paraxial line segments, which is great for certain applications. I want to just create a triangle. Again, just like Cela said, if I wanted to make this into a, take a square and cut it in half, I could do that. But as you saw, that's not the easiest thing to do here. And so I'll go ahead and do, this instead. Here I'm going to shift and click to set the, click to set the fill. I'm going to go back to this selection tool to move it, and I have one eye, and I can move that around, and then I'm going to copy and paste it, mirror it, and put it over here. And then I'm just going to kind of do a little bit to make them different. I know it sounds like I'm torturing my poor dog, but I promise she's fine. Now, one aspect of Inkscape that I also just really love about it is that it has this curvature tool that makes it so that I can really easily make really nice curved lines, which Inkscape or Illustrator does not have. However, if I actually try to go and edit the nodes for this, do you see how they're actually outside of where the actual visible curvature is? That can be difficult when you're actually going to be taking this from Inkscape and putting it into, again, a different software. In this instance, you are just going to go to path, object to path, and now I've turned that into a closer path. And now I can actually edit this, and the way that other software is going to see it is going to be the same way that I'm visually seeing it. Object to path is useful in every application. That's going to be also how you're going to take your text. If you did put text in here, like Cela said before. Pippa, I'm sorry. I adopted myself as a dog. But now, as Cela was also saying, you can also just start to create something, and then you can always adjust it later. So here, if I wanted to make a smile, I can just start moving things around. Are we okay on time? How's everybody doing with time?
So if people do need to drop out, feel free, because we are still recording this. So I think we can go on if you wish to, Kelsey. I'm
happy to.
All
Yeah,
right.
I'm sorry about the issues with Inkscape, but that's just, I will say that is the beast of Inkscape, is that 90% of the time, if you look on forums and stuff with Inkscape too, people are like, I don't know, I just had to exit the software and open it again and try it again, and I had done something was weird, and now it's fixed. That's Inkscape for you.
That
so you
is
can't
often the juggling, especially for libraries when you only have so much of a budget, where you look at Illustrator, it's an expensive software and it'd be expensive to buy every license for every computer that you have, versus Inkscape, which is free, but you're going to have programming issues and issues that just come up that are going to be a lot less often with Illustrator. So it's weighing out the options between expensive and more smoothly functional.
I appreciate it's just Inkscape, it happens, Christina. I love that, put it on a t-shirt. I might have to do that, actually. I'm gonna have to make it, it's just Inkscape, it happens shirt. In this instance, I'm just gonna go ahead and delete this object. And what you'll notice right now is if I'm trying to delete this object, this took me longer than I would like to admit to figure out. If I try to delete it right now, I'm pressing delete and nothing is happening. And it is very frustrating. And you're like, why isn't it deleting? It's because I have the individual node tool selected. If I had the full select and transform object tool and I press delete, then I can delete the object. That's something that can be really frustrating for patrons because they'll be like, why is nothing happening? Can you not? Sorry. My husband is working a 16-hour day, so she's expecting people to be home that aren't. So in this instance, I'm going to go ahead and create a smile. Because I'm using this curvature tool, I'm going to go in. Also, if you hold spacebar and left click, you can navigate around the screen. That's true for most design software. And I'm just going to go ahead and create like a general smile. I'm okay with the outside of the smile being rounded because I can fix that later. But first, before I do any other kind of manipulation with this, I'm going to go ahead again, go to path, object to path, and now I should be able to edit this a little bit more like I would like to. One thing I really like about Inkscape as well is that, so I can go ahead and just kind of move these around and edit these. So Pippa, see, to create kind of more of a sharp line here. There are other tools here that will allow me to do that. But at the moment, I'm fine with this. One thing I really like about Inkscape is that I can really, I don't, can you hear this? I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She's just like that. So if I go ahead, I'm on this line with this selecting the nodes tools over here. If I double click on this line anywhere, I will add another node, and then I'll add another node right here. And so now if I want to add a tooth, I can go ahead, I'm going to make that a sharp turn. I can add a tooth. I'm going to add another node here, move it up, and now I have one tooth. I can go over here, double click, add a node, double click to add a second node, move that up. I don't know, should he have one pointy tooth, one really long pointy tooth? Yeah, let's do it. All right. So now I'm going to create a tooth using the tools that we used before. I'm going to create a box. It doesn't really matter what this box looks like or where it is. I'm just going to go ahead and create it and just kind of move it around. I don't know. I don't think this should be too big of a tooth. I'm just going to put it there. I'm going to shift to select this shape, and then I'm going to go to path, and I'm going to go to difference. And if I click on that, it will take that tooth out of the initial shape. Now, if I had done that, just to give it an example, if my rectangle was underneath my path and I had selected this and done path difference, all of a sudden my face disappears and it's just that slightly shorter rectangle. So that's where the layers really matter. What layer something is on matters. So, and it actually even tells you, which I learned recently, if you hover over it, it will say create difference of selected paths and then in parentheses, bottom minus top. Very useful. So I always have the layers function open here so that I can really see what's on top because I'm going to be doing stuff like that. Now the image trace feature here is going to be similar to Illustrator in certain aspects. I can't see. How do I hide this thing on the top? I don't know. I'm just going to make this smaller. So I'm going to go ahead and look up which hat. I decided I liked this one. I don't know. What do we think? Let's do this one. It's basically the same thing. Never mind. Right now, so whenever I search something, so if you're going to cut something out on the Glowforge or any kind of laser cutter, I'm definitely gearing this more towards laser cutters, partly because it's the thing that we use the most in our space, is I always look for a silhouette of that object. And the reason for that is if I took the line art, if I did a witch hat line art and I did an image trace with that in Illustrator or Inkscape, it's going to see those the line, not as one single line, but as two edges of a shape. The first week that I worked at Anythink with Cela, I set something on fire in the Glowforge because I tried to cut out a very, very detailed design that I had done as line art on my iPad, and because it was in wood and also because it had that double line, the amount of time that it was next to each other moving across with the laser was enough to ignite the wood. It was fine, not a big deal, but something to really pay attention to, because that's going to, if you ever are cutting something on the Glowforge and you notice, or any kind of laser cutter, and you notice that you're getting that kind of double line, that is why. Let's do this one. Now, another thing, if I try to save this image as, and it tells me it's a WebP file, I do this a lot. I tell kids that I work with, because I'm a teen librarian, this isn't ethical. Don't do it if you're going to be selling the object, but if you're going to be, but if you're just doing this for fun, just something quick that you're making, it's okay. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this with my snipping tool on my computer, and I'm going to go ahead and paste it into Inkscape. Now the path tool, or object tool, you're going to have, nope, I always can never find this path. It's going to be trace bitmap. And now it's going to give me this option. Now, similarly to Illustrator, I can do multiple colors. It just has different tabs up here that will allow me to do that. In this instance, I'm going to do a single scan because it is, I'm just going to be going ahead to create just a black and white object. And I'm going to go ahead and do this. And one other thing that you'll notice is nothing looks like it changed. Whereas in Illustrator, it will basically overwrite the image that you had in here. In Inkscape, I have two objects. I have my my new vector file, which I know I have it because if I double click on it, I will suddenly start to see those nodes. And then if I move this, I have my original image. That can be really helpful because that way you can try doing multiple scans if you want to try out different applications. And it can also, most of the time, I just go ahead and delete it. That's also how I will get rid of any kind of background or graininess that I don't want. Now, in this instance, I had this kind of like little piece here. I'm going to go ahead and double click so that I am in my edit paths by node tool. And then I'm going to click and drag to select those nodes. So I can select multiple nodes at once. I'm going to press delete and I'm going to get rid of those. And now I have a hat. Again, I can't move it if I don't have my selection tool on there. And I'm going to make it a little short and squat so that it's not in the way. Now, if I wanted to cut this out on something like the Glowforge, what I would do is I would go ahead and select this path and where are we? Where's my exterior path? My outline, there it is. This path has outline path. And I'm going to go ahead and grab this hat. I'm going to copy it. Actually, no, I'm going to duplicate it. Copying and pasting, the reason I duplicate as opposed to copying and pasting most of the time is because if I copy and then I paste it, it's not in the same spot. In this instance, that's very annoying for me. So I'm going to go ahead and delete it. And then for this, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate it instead. And then I'm going to move this path up to my outline. And then I'm going to close the outline, duplicate that. And I'm going to go to this outline copy. I always create a backup because that way I don't have to go back and figure stuff out again. I'm going to select both of these. And then I'm going to go to path union. And now I have a single outline path. And if I close this so that I don't see it, I have this outside area. And so for this is where I like to go ahead and make the stroke red so that now I can see that that's my outline specifically. So now if I was going to take that and put it in the Glowforge, it would go ahead and it would engrave the parts that are within the shape of the object, and then it would just cut out the exact outline. However, if I did put this into something like Glowforge, something that to us right now, like Cela was mentioning before, it looks like it would go ahead and engrave the way we want it to. You would still see the crescents. So if I go ahead and upload this, does anybody here use Glowforge regularly? I know, Ron, it seems like you use one. If you're thinking about getting a laser, I don't recommend Glowforge because as a company, they're garbage to work with. But the UI for them is so nice, as you can see. It's nice to use. Ron.
Yeah, we've been using the X tool, and the interface is very nice. Their software.
Yeah, I've heard good things. I think I've heard really good things about the OMTech Polar. Uses what's the light something. But the benefit.
Lightburn.
Yes,
Lightburn.
Lightburn. Stop it. Sorry.
Christina in the chat also says, don't get a Forge. The UI is excellent, but the company not so much.
Yeah,
which is good to know because we were looking at a Glowforge, so maybe
I
not
would look
now.
I would look at OMTech because they also their compute their or other lasers, and a big part of stop it. I've spoiled her. But we have a whole story about our Glowforge, but the OMTech ones they're like half the price, and you're able to put in a rotary attachment, which you can't do with Glowforge, and also half the tools that you need to use the Glowforge software appropriately, you need to pay $200 a year additionally to get the pro version for. But as you'll notice here, I'm just going to go ahead and say this is a proof grade material so we can see it a little better. We still see these lines here going up into the hat. Even though right now you don't see this score line as going into the hat, it would still score as well as engrave there, so you'd still kind of see that line. So to mitigate that, like we were doing before, we're just going to go ahead and just delete or take this path. I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to move it to a new layer so that I'm not messing. Crescents 1, add, and I'm going to go ahead and take this guy, move it up to this crescents 1. I want it to be in that, and then I'm going to take my crescent, move it up. And then in this instance, what you end up essentially having to do is what I'm going to do, and this took me longer than I'd like to admit to figure out today, it goes here, is I need to move the hat on top, and then I need to create 3 versions of it. Because one thing that is frustrating with this is that if I select this and then I select my crescent and I do my path difference, that original hat went away. And then I'm going to go ahead, go to this one, grab this crescent, path, difference, and now I have it so that when I would put it into Glowforge, it would look like this. So then I actually have my options too. So now it won't engrave up into the hat. And that's the basics. I guess this was a good example of also kind of the pitfalls of Inkscape, because it can be a little bit frustrating to figure out all the little things. I will say I highly recommend Logos by Nick on both YouTube, as well as he does have a paid masterclass bundle where he does a masterclass for Inkscape, and he truly does things in Inkscape that like I did not, like there constantly comments on there, like, I did not know that was possible. As well as a master introduction to the Illustrator tools. And he also covers Affinity Designer and Affinity Photo, which are an alternate software that I have because they are paid software that are similar kind of to Illustrator and Photoshop, but you only buy, it's a single purchase as opposed to a subscription-based software, and it's only $60, which compared is not like available to everybody, but is much more affordable than a lot of other suites out there. The only thing is that the designer program does not have an image trace feature, which is pretty hard for most people. That's like the #1 thing we use it for. So, any questions? No? Awesome, cool.
All right, so I'm going to jump back in here, and I want to thank everyone so much for attending Tool Talk, the Night of the Haunted Vector program. We hope you learned a lot. I know that I sure did. Like Kelsey said, I do not have a background in graphic design, so this has been really helpful just for the overview of both programs. I did in the chat drop our LibraryMakers survey. So if you don't mind, if you'll click on that before you end your Zoom call here and just fill that out really quickly, that would help us so much in learning about what new programs you might want to hear in the future. So I just want to thank Cela and Kelsey so much again, and all our attendees. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend.
I think we can all agree that the Haunted Vector program is Inkscape.
It definitely is.
I think so, for sure.
I don't know if anybody else sings it to their software when they're frustrated with it, but the amount that I sing the sweet tunes of Inkscape is frequent.
Thank you all
but
for
I do like it.
coming.
Thank you. Thanks, Cela, for letting me know
I can
about
afford
this.
to be haunted.
Oh, yes. Christina said in
Yeah,
chat,
there's-
yes, but I can afford to be haunted. Yes, I agree with
Exactly.
you, Christina. The free
Yes.
program is just kind of what we can afford right now. So,
Mhm.
Yes.
Thank you for the presentation, both of you. And what did you want filled out? I'm sorry, I missed
oh,
that.
sure. So in the chat, and I'm going to drop it again, there is a link to a Google form. And if you just click on that before you end this call, you'll have that pop up on your device, and you can fill that out really quickly. And we would surely appreciate that. Do you see the link in the
Okay.
chat?
Yeah, I do see that link now.
Oh, great.
Okay,
Awesome.
thank you all.
Thank
Have a
you.
good night.
Thank you. Have a good
Good night. Have a
one.
great weekend. Bye-bye. I'm going to go ahead and end the call
Bye.
now. So thank y'all.